You know, right now, whether it's in this country, meaning America, or in other Western nations across the world, the idea of being trans is being normalized. It's on social media, it's on mainstream media, it's in movies, it's in documentaries, it's in TV shows, it's seemingly everywhere, including advertisements. However, there's an untold side to the story, and the untold side involves how children within the education system, the medical system, and many other systems are getting pipelined into this trans ideology, as well as the other side, which is people who transitioned and are now in the process of transitioning back because they suffered so much regret. However, even though these stories are getting ignored and or marginalized, well, we here at the Epoch Times, we decided to give them center stage. Our team here produced an unbelievably awesome documentary called Gender Transformation, The Untold Realities. And in it, it exposes exactly what's happening behind the scenes. It's an amazing documentary that is a real tearjerker. I will be surprised if you watch it and you don't shed tears, at least in the middle or definitely at the end. And today, I am incredibly honored to be joined by the director and producer of this documentary, Mr. Tobias Elfhoga. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
Tobias, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
For sure. So let's start with the most, in my opinion, obvious question. So, you know, whether it's in Sweden, where you're from, or here in America, the mainstream media is just completely ignoring this topic, the topic of people who regret transitioning and begin detransitioning. So why didn't you also ignore this topic? Why did you decide to actually go in and make a full-length documentary about it?
So I started to do some research about the topic because at first, actually, I was asked by NTD, Epoch Times, to make a documentary about the subject of transgender. And at first I was a little bit, hesitant, like, okay, this is a kind of sensitive topic. But then I started to do research about it, and I watched some documentaries, did a lot of, looked at different articles and interviews with people. And one documentary I came across was actually made by the Swedish state television. So it is called Uppdrag granskning in Swedish. And they...
what does that translate to?
It's like mission to investigate, something like that. So this particular investigation was about the children. They actually was a part of 3 different programs. This was the last one. So they investigated the side effects of all these puberty blockers and cross hormones. Not the surgeries so much, but the puberty blockers. And they actually confronted the hospitals that were, responsible for doing this to the children when they are so young. And they asked these really hard questions. And I could see, like, these hospitals, they didn't have any good answers. And I could see that this is really like a... This is a pure case. This is a clean case of something that, like, really bad that's happening. There's no like, okay, but it can be good in some. No, when you looked at this program, you see that there was one case with a girl, and she started to take puberty blockers when she was around like 12, 13, and then she went on for 4 years, and the hospital didn't stop. They just continued, and after these 4 years, the bone marrow, the bone density of in the body was so bad she could hardly stand up. For 10 minutes, then she was totally exhausted. So I mean, it puts a hold of all the development. And they say that it's just a pause button that you can continue if you want, or that you don't miss puberty, but that's totally false. And this is like, it's so many bad side effects for the people. And one doctor, he said right out in the television, he was like a high doctor, and he said, this is chemical castration of our children. Wow. And so when I saw this documentary, it was so clear for me that this is not a political issue. This is a like total, I don't know the English word, it's such a bad thing that's happening to the children, to future generations. So of course I had to do it. So yeah, after that there was no question.
Wow. What effect did that documentary you're mentioning in Sweden, what effect did it have on society over there after it was published?
That's quite interesting, actually. So the effect was immediately after the Uppdrag Granskning, this program was broadcasted. Actually, the National Board of Health and Welfare, they changed the direction of how we approach this policy of giving puberty blockers to children. So after that, they actually, it's very hard for children to get puberty blockers. And it's only in exceptional cases you can get it. So now it's not a problem in Sweden in the same way anymore. Of course, it's still a problem, but yeah, it completely changed. So that was also very hopeful that through a documentary we can make a change.
Wow. So is that sort of the thinking that once you saw this documentary and you saw the effect it had on Swedish society, you thought, wow, I can also do this perhaps for American society? Was that sort of the thinking, or did you have some other sort of bigger goal in mind? Like what was the thinking behind it?
Yeah, I would say my aspiration was actually to not only go into the side effects, because the Swedish programs, they focus really on the side effects. And that's a good thing to focus on, because we really need to be conscious about it. But I wanted to go deeper and see all the mechanisms. So that's what we have in our documentaries is a little bit longer. So we have time to go through like the mechanisms behind, like how you get influenced by social media, by all kinds of factors, by teachers, by the education system, and also then how it is with the surgeries. And also like what's behind it, what's the deeper cause, what's causing this, what's the economical benefits, because you always say like follow the money. So that's something I wanted to do as well.
Yeah, the money is kind of, to me, one of the most interesting aspects of it, because like I can imagine, let's say the big pharma companies, the big pharmaceutical companies, the hospitals, and maybe some of the other non-hospital clinics, they obviously have a profit motive, right? So, somebody who is transitioning, they're going to be needing surgeries repeatedly, they're going to need drugs for a long period of time, follow-up checks, it's all covered by insurance, at least for most states throughout the US. So it's like, okay, obvious profit motive. But what about the education system and the government and the media? Do they have a profit motive too? Like, why are they pushing it so systematically throughout all of society? Did you figure that out?
We had a really great expert talking about this point, and she's been within the schools, a therapist and also a social worker, and she's been also involved with the LGBTQ organizations at schools. She was actually involved in a secret club, LGBTQ club, that were actually like taking care of children who came and were questioning their gender identity or having other problems. And she said, the main motive that she saw is that people wanted to be good. I mean, we all want to be good citizens. We want to do what's good, what's right. And she saw that, okay, this is being used. So we think we're doing something good for the children, taking care of them. But when you see what's actually happening, it's not good in the long run. So she actually turned around a little bit, and now she is having this website, The Truthful Therapist, and she's helping people to see through this, because it's really hard if you don't have the facts, if you don't have the research behind. Many research investigations that are made here in the US are actually quite short term, and they are not like, it's not verified science. It's not made in a true scientific manner, like following up, making it like a long-term studies. Actually, the long-term studies are actually found in Sweden, and when you look at those, you see a completely different picture of it. So, because Sweden have it, this is a policy by the state. You have to follow up on all the medical records. So that's why we can have this. But we see, when you see that, it's actually very damaging to children, and actually it's a higher risk that they commit suicide if they start to transition and change the gender than if not. So, and that's not mentioned in the US.
So the longer term studies in Sweden, they show that with a medical intervention over a long period of time, it's actually worse generally. That's what they show.
Yeah. Wow. That there's like you don't avoid, because that's a main talking point that they have here in the US, that if you don't transition right away as a child, you will probably commit suicide. So that's the thing we always heard, that okay, they even say that right out to the parents. Would you rather have a dead daughter than a living son? That's like reoccurring, and it's like, wow, of course I want to have a living son. Then there's no choice. And that's like the same, going back to what you asked, what's happening in the schools. So if you go by that, then you think you're actually saving lives, and of course you want to save lives. So I think that's the propaganda that's being taught, that's so damaging. That's then you get people to follow that, and you get people to you use their good sides, their good consciousness, but in a bad way.
Yeah. So you said that one of the talking points, and it's mentioned in the film too, would you rather have a dead daughter or a living son, right?
Yeah.
One of the other talking points, and it's also mentioned in the film, is the idea that you can just kind of put a pause on puberty. Just take these puberty blockers, no problem. If you change your mind, which you probably won't, you can just restart puberty later. In the film, well, you have a couple of examples, but can you sort of lay it out for the people watching? Is that actually accurate?
So it's not accurate at all. That's my experience, my learning when I interviewed all these experts. It's so many different side effects. I mentioned the bone density, but of course, if you pause puberty, it's such, think of the body. That's a period of time when the body is developing as at most. Everything. So everything get affected, and we interviewed a lot of detransitioners, that went on puberty blockers. So they have problems with their genitals. They have problems peeing. There's, so it's damaging your most, important system for, future generations, to be able to have a son or a daughter in the future. So that's what's so sad about this. When I interview these people who are regretting the decision that they made when they were like 12 or 13, and then, you regret it, but what can you do? It's too late. And also, most probably you're going to be a lifetime patient. So you have to always go and check and see, because you have damaged your body so much. So it's irreversible.
So when you were in the process of making the film, you were speaking to a lot of the detransitioners, the people who regretted it and then tried to change back, and you spoke to a lot of the family members. What was maybe the most heartbreaking or heart-wrenching story that you came across?
Yeah, definitely Abigail Martinez. So that was like maybe the third interview we had. And we didn't expect what was going to happen, because the whole team was almost crying during the interview. Even the cameraman, he's like this not stiff but very manly guy, never cries. And even the cameraman, he was like crying this moment. And then afterwards we discussed this, and then we knew that, okay, this is really going to be our main interview, because it's so powerful. It's so, it's so emotional. And that's why we decided also to make this into a part drama, to really get, because it's so clear. You see the emotions, you see the mechanisms leading up to something really terrible, and how the journey goes there, all these steps. It was so clear in so many ways, and also it was so tragic. So it's something that when you hear it, you don't forget it. It's like it sticks with you, and like, okay, so then I knew also we have to do something to get this story out.
Yeah, wow. So I don't want to give away what the story is, but it's touching. About a week ago, I was reading this online article. There's a famous actress in America, Elliot Page, right? Elliot Page, Ellen Page, and she recently transitioned, and it was like a big deal. And then more recently, she published a book, right? So now she's doing the book tour, and she's giving a lot of interviews. And so in one of the interviews that she gave to some magazine, she said she was talking about her transition, and she said, "Oh, I was hearing voices in my head. I went to the doctor, and like that same day, they scheduled the surgery, for me to transition, because the voices in my head told me that I was the opposite gender." And as I was reading that on the article, on the magazine, I was like, you know, like, what does anybody see what's being written here? So I guess my question is, if that, it's not hidden. I mean, people know that this is happening. They openly talk about it. How do you hope to actually affect any change if this is already kind of like people accept this to be the fact? Like, how can you actually wake people up by showing them what's happening if people kind of already, you know, it's not that hidden? So I guess that's my question. Like, how do you think people can actually wake up to the reality?
Well, that's a really good question, actually. So I think when that's why we have these drama parts, and why I think this case of Abigail Martinez is so clear, because, you know, she was the mother was resisting, but she was not like, you know, hardly resisting. She was not like anti-trans, like, you know, she was not fighting with anyone. She was always like compassionate, and she always like tried to see the other side as well. And I think that's a strength, because then you see she actually, you know, she couldn't do so much, and she eventually, the state even took the custody of her daughter, and, you know, you see all these things happening, and I think it becomes more clear, because we want to stay true to the reality, to her story. And then you see how easy it is to be caught up in it. Like you mentioned this story that you're, oh, of course I want to transition, I need to make the surgery. And that's been the case with, I think, maybe all of these detransitioners that we've been interviewing. They have the same kind of stories. Abel Garcia, he was like, you know, the same day, he was just like, approved. Okay, you can do the surgery. And, you know, they even said to him, they even, you know, gave him the permission or the time to also to take off his genitals, you know. He was only going to have, you know, female breasts, but then they also gave him the other, you know, surgery.
Without him even asking.
Yeah. So that was crazy. I mean, just one appointment. That's how crazy it is. I mean, that you can get it so fast. And it's like, but if you want to go the other side, it's harder. Suddenly you don't have the, you know, insurances covering it or anything. You suddenly, and also you have the community against you oftentimes. It's like, oh, you're the bad sheep because it didn't work on you, so you must be something wrong with you, and they like outcasts. But the main thing that I think is so important to understand, the mechanisms, is also true with your story, what you're saying, like she had these voices, she just have to do it. And why do you hear these voices? Because they are so fed with all this, you know, social media influencers, and they are all telling their story that, oh, as soon as I transitioned, I become so much happier. And so it's very tricky for them to see. They see that, oh, my life is bad, because usually they have some trauma, they have some issues, of course. That's usually the underlying issues that lead them to, you know, want to do the transition, according to what I heard, my experience from all these interviews. And then you're suddenly like, oh, this is the solution to my problem. I'm not happy, and I can do something to become happy. So then, of course, they want to have a quick fix. They want to do the surgery. You want to, you know, and everything that's against that and questioning that, that's, you know, oh, that must be bad. You're transphobe, or your family. You go against your family because, you know, they're against you, or they don't want to make you happy, or that you're gonna, you know, fulfill yourself. So that's the really tricky thing that I think we can disclose by having it so clearly in a documentary like this, is that, well, this is not a solution to your problems. This is really not a solution, and that's what I think is so pushed in this ideology. That, okay, the solution is change your gender. And we have a really good interview with someone who is actually one of the, you know, oldest detransitioners. He started, he's over 80 years old, and he's been through this, like he did it for like 30 or 35 years ago. And he just like, he made it, and then he regretted it. And now he's helping so many others. And that's what, and he studied a lot of psychology, and because he really wanted to understand why did he why did he go through this? It was such an unnecessary thing, and it hurt his life so much and his body and everything. So now he wants to just, help others. That's all he does. Sexchangeregret.com, that's his website. So he's been helping a lot of detransitioners. And yeah, so I think that's the issue when you see that, and that's what he said as well. This is the propaganda that you get. Everything, social media, the education system, everything is just like, okay, you want to be happy? You're not happy? You want to be happy? Here's what's going to make you feel happy again.
Yeah, well, it's true. And you know what? The other side of the story almost never gets told. This side, the detransition side. And you know what? Now that as you were explaining it, I suddenly had this realization that your documentary is so powerful, because normally these types of documentaries are labeled as transphobic, just right away, just like, oh, that's it, just put that label on there. But because you're interviewing the actual people who themselves were trans, right? And they said, hey, listen, this is not what it's cracked out to be. It's like, well, they're not transphobic. They themselves are trans, or at least they were, right? So it's like, it's an amazing look. It really is like, your documentary is a look behind the curtain. That's what I felt when I was watching it. It's like, this is that's what it's called, right? The untold realities, right? It's true. That's exactly what it is. Was there anything, as you were making this documentary, was there anything you learned that really surprised you?
A lot of this was kind of new to me. Like I said in the beginning, I was, even, not sure if I would, do this subject. But the more I learned about it, the more I felt like this is such an important issue. This is, happening not only in the US, it's happening all over the world. And there's people profiting on our children. There's hardly, of course there's things that are worse, but I feel it's so bad. How can you profit on making our children becoming, sterile, and hurting their bodies, becoming lifelong patients? How can anything be worse than that? Like going after the children with this and pushing it so hard. I felt it's so unfair to the children. I felt like you said also, there's been so much just one-sided in many of the medias. If you look at some big platforms, streaming platforms, I looked at those documentaries that they all paint a picture of like I said, oh, this is the solution to your problem. And they are following people, and they're not questioning anything. They're just following some people who do their transition, and okay, so everything becomes so much happier after. And that's the picture you get a lot in the media. And that's, yeah, like you said, that's why we need also to see the other side of all these medical complications. And I've been, also following on social media and YouTube, people who are quite happy with their transition, but they are talking a lot about their complications, a lot about, problems they have with their bodies, because, and that's something that we also understood through these interviews. You cannot really change your gender. You can only, make it appear that it's changed, but, there's so many underlying issues that you can't solve, and usually you get into a cycle where you okay, I changed this and I changed this, but I need to change even more. And oh, my cheek, they're not like perfect, or still that, so you're never happy because you always see the other thing until maybe you realize I will never become happy like this. And of course there is the other side of it, that there are people, because of this community is pushing it so hard. So there's I don't know how to put it, but the community effect, that you're in the community and everyone is so happy and everyone is cheering you, and of course you will feel some happiness in the beginning or in some stages. And of course there are people who are having that, the community is having that effect on you, because maybe you've been feeling like there's a lot of autistic people that have been feeling outside of society. And suddenly, through this effect of the community, suddenly you're like, oh, I'm trans, and you suddenly belong somewhere. And and then they think, of course, this is such a great thing. But as I said before, like the side effects, they will also surface, and there's a lot of complications, and especially when you feel your body is behaving in ways you don't recognize your body anymore. Maybe you go on testosterone and you become aggressive. You have so many emotions that and it's painful in the body as well. So there's so many things that we don't look at and do research about, that I think we need to investigate as well. And that's not made so much. It's very much ignored, a lot of these side effects.
One of the shocking things that I found when I was talking to some of the people in the documentary ahead of the panel discussion, but also when I was watching it, is that you can talk about these problems. If let's say your son comes to you and they say, well, I'm thinking of transitioning, you can tell him like, hey, there's 27 problems that you can come across by doing this process. A lot of people regret it. Maybe we should maybe you should just try something else. Maybe you're just feeling depressed, etc. Like you can talk to your son about it one-to-one. But a doctor, at least in certain states, can't, right? Because that's an aspect of the conversion therapy law. Like you're not allowed to actually try to talk someone out of it, not even talk them out of it. Sometimes just asking him about the underlying issues that's causing him or her to try to go trans, even just discussing those issues, that's a form of conversion therapy and therefore illegal, right?
Yeah.
Some of the people you spoke to said that. So it's like the highest authority in people's lives, usually, in the medical field at least, the doctor, they're not allowed to tell them what you're able to tell me. Isn't that shocking?
That was actually one of the aspects that was so shocking, that not only the doctors, but the therapists, they can lose their license. If the therapist is like, not immediately affirming your new identity, they can lose their license. And, and in the schools, if the teacher is not affirming the new identity, they can, get a lot of backfire from that. So yeah, the whole system is like that, right? You have to affirm, and even it's even on the highest level of society, they even the president of the United States went out and you have to affirm your children. So it's like on all levels of society, it's so much pushed. You have to affirm, and if you don't, you'll get in trouble. And that, for me, that should be really like become so obvious that there's something fishy about it. If you can't question, if you can't do anything, you just have to approve. That's for me is like a dictatorship. It's like the total control. It's like totalitarian society. You have to just do this, or else you'll get in trouble. Everyone, the doctors, the therapists, the teachers, and that's scary. That was the really scary part, because I've seen doing documentaries. I've seen how the system works in China, and the system in North Korea or whatever. Then you understand it's totalitarian. It's like, okay, you have to follow your authorities. But having that here in such a tragic way that you lose your custody of your child, and the state will take care of it. That for me was shocking, yeah.
Well, I hope just like that one documentary in Sweden had a very large effect, I hope your documentary exposing what's happening here in the States has a similar effect here, where people at least wake up to it and maybe affect some change. Last question. What do you want to leave to parents? Let's say somebody's watching this, they have kids at home, maybe small kids, teenage kids, either way. What would you like to tell them?
We have a really good case in the documentary, airing Friday, and she's been a liberal for her whole life. She's been, voting for Democrats all the time. And then suddenly she saw that her daughter was so influenced by this in the school. After just, going to some, sexual curriculum, having some sexual education courses, suddenly she was considering herself being, pansexual, or like all her friends were something else than just straight. Just by one day after the other, they're all having different identities, like that. And she said, this is something strange. And then after just some more, weeks, suddenly the daughter was trans. And what she did, and that was really brave, she was like, okay, I have to, she tried to affect the school. She couldn't, because they were like pressuring her. And even she, she had even the police and the social care coming and discussing and everything. But in the end, she just like, okay, she quit her job. That's how important she felt this was. She quit her job. She withdrew her daughter from that school and found a good private school where she knew it was not so much pressure. And she had, the whole family surrounding, her with love and confirmation and just, forming a good environment for her daughter. And then she saw that she was neutralized, or by this gender ideology, she was neutralized, and suddenly the interest dropped for it. So they didn't push her like in any way. No, they just gave her a lot of love. They tried to be understanding, and they had a good family environment for her. And suddenly all these thoughts kind of disappeared, and suddenly she came back to her senses and like, okay, I'm not trans, I'm happy with my life. And I think that's something if you're like a parent and you see the different signs that, okay, suddenly your child is thinking he or she is trans, maybe there's something underlying, and then go back to the roots. Try to, as a family, be a supportive unit, because that's what I learned also through all these interviews, is that, okay, this is all breaking down on the family. If we can, have strong families and loving good atmosphere, and neglecting our children, because it's so easy this age as well. They have all the social media, all the interest in society, so they are drifting apart from the family. But if we can catch up, like, okay, have a strong family, I think it will be so much easier, and and not be judgmental. Okay. Just and don't be afraid. I mean, okay, so if they say they're trans, okay, and you're afraid and you want to fight it, it's going to be worse. So, okay, just to have a loving, good family environment, I think that's so important. And I think that can really help.
Tobias, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, if you'd like to watch the documentary for yourself, I would highly recommend it. It is awesome. The link will be down there in the description box below. It'll be premiering on June 19th. And if you want to check it out, again, that link will be down there. Just click on it and you can head on over. And I would recommend watching it with your whole family, because the information it contains, at least in my opinion, is vitally important to the future of this country. So check it out, watch it with your family, maybe even send it to your friends, send it to your enemies, send it to your colleagues, your neighbors, anyone you know, because whether they have kids, grandkids, whether they know someone who has kids, they should know what's going on behind the scenes. So again, that link will be down there in the description box below. Hope you check it out. And then until next time, I'm your host, Roman from the Epoch Times. Stay informed, and most importantly, stay free.